Welcome to the Early Wedge presented by BetMGM. I am your host, Eric Cohen, otherwise known as EC. If you are watching this, well, make sure to subscribe to the SportsLine YouTube video or YouTube channel and like this video. And while you're at it watching things, check out the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am this weekend at 3 p.m. Eastern on Saturday and Sunday on CBS and Paramount+. There is much to discuss this week, so let's bring in the stars of the show. We have we'll call him the Scotty Scheffler of golf bettors, the counselor. Nejad, also the host. That's right. You're the Scotty Scheffler of golf bettors, the best, the number one in the world. And we're going to call him the Rory McIlroy of golf writers from CBS Sports, Patrick McDonald. I hope you guys like your comparisons right off the bat. But let's get right into weather. We're getting into storylines. Let's talk some weather here. That's my storyline. Let's get right to it. So I write this fantasy column for sportsline.com yesterday, and I figured the weather was going to be fine. I looked at it and it was like, great. So I log on to X this morning and I see Patrick's tweet and it says, this weather is going to be a disaster on Sunday. Patrick, are we going to get in 54 holes? Are we getting a Monday finish? Are they going to play 36 on Saturday? What's going to happen with this weather?
Oh, geez. Second week in a row, you really just tossed me a softball here off the bat, EC. I really appreciate it. And the Rory McIlroy comparison, world number 2, I'd love to know who the better writer is out there. If you're out there, please let me know. As for the weather, it's going to be insane. And it is certainly something CBS, since it is on our network and the PGA Tour, is talking about constantly, because you know what next week is, and you know what game is on CBS, and you know where all those production team members need to go. It's Las Vegas. And so the last thing they want to do is have some sort of Monday finish like they did last year. They definitely don't want this to somehow bleed into Tuesday. That's not gonna work. So what happens? I have no idea. The weather looks horrible. A lot of rain, an inch on Thursday, I believe. You look at Sunday, the rain kind of subsides. Well, you're hit with 60-mile-per-hour gust.
They're not going to play in that. They're not playing in that. It's just not happening.
No, so it hasn't really been a shortened tournament. I think Adam Scott won at the Genesis a handful of years back in 36 holes. When the Queen passed away on the DP World Tour, that was 54 holes. So it has happened somewhat recently across professional golf, but it's certainly not the usual. And I honestly couldn't tell you what's going to happen.
Counselor, with this uncertainty, does this make you want to bet less on this tournament than you normally would?
It's a really good question, actually. So a little bit. So in the matchup department, and we don't have like the full allotment of matchups out yet. Don't get me wrong. We all have matchups for this show, but in the matchup department, I think it's kind of a case-by-case basis. I will tell you where I kind of wanted to scale back. You'll see when we get to the outrights. I picked 2 outrights, and I'll be honest about the second one. I was almost, well, I actually picked 4 outrights. There's 2 in the long shot department that are like kind of long bombs, but normally I would have like 2 or 3 main guys that I would be betting in the outright department. But to me, from a bankroll management standpoint, because day to day, we don't know what this weather is going to look like, and we don't know what Sunday is going to look like. We know what it's projected to look like, but by Saturday, it might be different. And we might have a tournament that finishes on Saturday or Monday or whatever the case may be. So I'm reserving a little bit of my bankroll, especially in the outright department, for live betting. Like more information is better, right? So we could have a scenario. We've got so much going on already with the weather, with the rain, with the wind, with the rotating courses for Thursday and Friday. I feel like this is one of those tournaments. Maybe you scale it back a little bit, particularly in some of those, I don't want to call them gimmicky bets, but some of the more long shot bets like your outrights. Maybe you only take 1 or 2 guys as opposed to the 3 or 4 you normally take, and have some money for a live bet.
All right, well, let's stick on the long shot theme because that's your storyline, Counselor. As far as what we've seen in January, 4 triple-digit winners. I'm not hitting any of those. I'm not even close. The thing about Matthew Pavon, I mean, great win. Don't get me wrong. That shot over the water on 18 was phenomenal. But if you gave me 100 golfers, if you said you can have 100 golfers in the field going into Torrey Pines, I'm not picking him. If you said you can have 100 golfers at the Amex, I'm not picking Nick Dunlap. And the same thing with Grayson Murray in Hawaii. You're not even close on this. Your storyline is, tell us more about it.
Well, what's really interesting is that because the field is so loaded, if we just refer to the top, Scotty Scheffler, Rory McIlroy. I mean, just go down the line. Cantlay, Xander Schauffele, Max Homa. I mean, there's like some superstar power in this field. And so what that does is some of the, I guess, lesser players, but players that would have been maybe in the 30 to 40 to 50 to 1 market a couple of tournaments ago. Well, now they're in like the 80 to 90 to 100 to 1 market. So I do think this is a tournament, especially when you're talking about the lack of distance, the lack of prowess you require off the tee on this course. I do think it mitigates some of what the superstars do really well. And with that in mind, I really like the idea of maybe focusing on some of those more long shot-y guys, like the Brian Harmons of the world, for example, that the 90 to 1, the 80 to 1s, the Sepp Strakas. Like, I do think those guys have a shot, especially when we consider it's a no cut, but it's only an 80-person field. I think a lot of these guys are getting pushed down to odds that are really appealing, but that are also attainable. So I do think while the top of the board is really strong, I do think the middle to the bottom of the board is pretty strong too.
Well, we'll be interested to see what you come up with later in the show. Don't want to spoil it right now. Patrick, your storyline is very interesting as far as this is now an elevated tournament, 80 players, no cut. But a lot of these guys have not played at Pebble Beach very often, if at all. How will that affect the tournament this weekend?
Really attainable, but appealing. That's what I tell myself at the bar every Friday night, Sia, before I go up and approach a woman.
Yes.
But the way I see it is, look, we have someone like Scotty Scheffler. He's making his tournament debut. Rory McIlroy has only played this tournament twice. This will be his 4th appearance at Pebble Beach. Colin Morikawa's making his tournament debut. Justin Thomas rarely plays here, but on the flip side, you have someone like Jordan Spieth, the horse for the course. Patrick Cantlay, horse for the course. Max Homa, the California King. So it does kind of present some weird little avenues in if you want to play the course history, if you want to play the geography roadmap, whatever you want. And I think it's just really interesting and could lead down to, like Sia said, maybe some surprise names contending once again.
All right, well, let's get into the DFS picks. And, normally I would say, well, you're the guys that you like. I know you guys like to look at middle of the board, but let's talk about your fades. And see, I'm going to start with you. You're fading the number 2 player in the world who's coming off a 2nd place finish and a win in Dubai, yet you don't like him this weekend. Why is that?
Which means I'm really fading Patrick McDonald. See, I knew you were going to make that comp at the beginning of the show, and I was like, how do I get one up on Patrick McDonald? And he doesn't have Scotty Scheffler as his fade, so I'm clean. I'm good in that department. So here's the thing about Rory McIlroy. This is a DFS question. There's a couple things we should know. Pricing is really soft, so it's not like getting to Rory McIlroy is tough in DFS, but because of that, he is a little bit popular. And what I talked about on the front end with kind of long shots being able to contend here, I think Rory off the tee, like, again, it's a little bit mitigated here in terms of how much he's so much better than everybody else, like off the tees. Sorry for messing that up, but the long and short of it is I just don't see the advantage for Rory relative to some of these other courses. So it's just an easy fade for me. I mean, I do like guys that are right above him and right below him. Like, I'll play Scotty Scheffler, I'll play Victor Hovland, but I'm just not super interested in playing Rory McIlroy at 11-5.
All right, now the players that you're buying this week, you talked about Brian Harman a little bit, but Brendan Todd also has a pretty good course history here.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? Because this is like a plotting sort of positional course. And so Brendan Todd, everybody's going to basically be in the same spot in the fairway, even shorter hitters like Brendan Todd. You got to be dialed in on approach, and you got to be good with the short game. And Brendan Todd really checks all of those boxes. And we've seen that with recent finishes at the AT&T Pebble Beach. So I think Brendan Todd is just one of those players that he's not exciting. Not a ton of people are going to play him. Again, this is a DFS discussion, so let's just remember the context. There's so many more exciting players to play than Brendan Todd. He's just not a splash play, and that's part of the reason I like him at 7,000, given the course history. His recent history is fine, and I would say the same about Brian Harman. Brian Harman, the course history, there's not much of it with Brian Harman, but he really profiles well for this course. He's got the short game around the green, and with the putter, he can get absolutely hot, particularly with the putter at times. And he's dialed in on approach. He doesn't need to be long, which he isn't. So I think it's 7,600. Like, this just seems like an underprice for Brian Harman. Like, don't forget, if the going gets tough from a weather standpoint, Brian Harman should be just fine. And if you think, well, Brian Harman's not a winner when it comes to this field, I mean, he literally just won the Open Championship not 6-7 months ago. So I just think he's a guy that's probably not getting enough attention. Now, in the 3rd spot, I could have put anybody here. I chose Brandon Wu because I just wanted to choose somebody that was going to be really different. As you can see, I take the Patrick McDonald approach here, and I take a bunch of cheap guys. Just so everybody understands what I'm doing here, this isn't me saying I don't like Victor Hovland or Scotty Scheffler or Patrick Cantlay or Xander Schauffele. Play those guys if you want, but you'll have the ability to play multiple guys like that if you have lower end guys that don't carry a lot of ownership. In particular, in Brandon Wu, nobody's going to play Brandon Wu. The thing about Brandon Wu that I like is his recent form. He's really been dialed on approach. And again, when it comes to DFS, I'm trying to be early to the party. And I don't think Brandon Wu is this like super hyper talented guy relative to the top of the field, but he is trending in a direction that I don't think people are like truly recognizing. I know he gets 4 rounds. This is a no-cut event. So it's 6,300. If he can spike with that approach and if he can spike with the putter, then I've got somebody that nobody else has at 6,300.
See, I like hearing that. It's like the next step up from a parlay right there, counselor, to have somebody else that nobody has in DFS. I love it. That I will certainly consider when building my lineup this week. All right, Patrick, you disappoint me here. You know, your fade is the player that obviously has a tremendous course history and who I really, really like this week. Why are you anti-Jordan Spieth?
Anytime Jordan Spieth is probably going to be the highest owned guy, I am probably going to fade him. And you see the course history, you see the podium finish at the Century, and I totally understand where people are coming from, but there's a ton of volatility with Jordan Spieth just in general. There seems to be an art to picking when he will play well. You can't really back it up with statistics at all. So really just ownership wise at 9,400, a ton of people are going to play him. So I will not. But I do like Harris English at 7,100. Not a great Farmers Insurance Open for him, but had a great Hawaii swing, top 15 at the Century, top 10 at the Sony Open. He's going to have to drive the ball a little better, but this is a guy who popped up at big-time tournaments last year. U.S. Open, API, Wells Fargo Championship, inside the top 10 at all of them. And then someone who Sia liked a lot last week, Emiliano Grillo. Nice T20 finish there at Torrey Pines. Irons were great. I like him when we can kind of get him on a shorter golf course where his irons can shine. T7 at the Sony Open. So at 6,800, I think that's a bargain. And then going to take a flyer on Mackenzie Hughes. He's been good to me in the past, and so I kind of have a soft spot for him. It kind of feels like almost like a B-level RSM Classic week. Cold weather, rainy, windy, wet. Irons are trending. T16 his last time here, so I'll take a little nibble on the Canadian.
Yeah, I really like that bet, and you will see why a little bit later in the show. But thank you for explaining my logic. I appreciate that. You know, everybody, when it comes to Sia, knows him as the FRL king. And by the way, Patrick is no slouch either. He has given out his many winners over time, and I know he doesn't like to give out as many on the show, but Counselor, you would normally give out a bunch of FRLs in this particular section. However, with the 2-course rotation and the weather, none are out yet. When can people find your first-round leader picks?
Yeah, and I think it's because tee times aren't out yet. I'm not 100% sure why they're not out, but either way, they're not out. I keep looking to my left to see if we'll suddenly see them. But good question, because I do write an article for SportsLine, as everybody knows. So they should be in the SportsLine article, which I may have to wait to publish, frankly, because I'd like to get the first round leaders in there. But it'll either be late tonight that it'll be up there on the SportsLine site or early tomorrow. So you can look forward to that. It'll have my matchups, outrights, but certainly my first round leaders as well, and some finishing position plays. I'll say this, though, if for some reason they're not out tomorrow, you can expect Thursday morning. I'm not sure when the opening tee time is. I know we're on the West Coast, but hopefully, we'll see. I should have him in the article, but if not, I'll have him on the Early Edge on Thursday at 10 o'clock.
You'll be dropping dimes Thursday morning, worst case. I'll tell you, it's frustrating, though, because we expect on Tuesday night all the lines to be out by now, as you said. And I was checking all day as well because I'm excited. You are cash money. People talk about your picks in forums all over the internet, and I'm not kidding. I'm serious. They're like, what is Sia picking this week?
Let me say this. So I hit my 2 matchups last week. I hit all my round matchups. I think I lost one of them. So we're on a nice little run here. And we almost hit Steven Yeager. He was on, I guess, the South course on Thursday. He was 1 shot back, got to the par 5. And he parted. Otherwise, we would have had a split with 1 or 2 other guys. But I do want to shout out Patrick McDonald. He had, 1 outright last week, and it was Nikolai Højgaard, who had at 50-1, who had a very good shot to win that tournament. Just kind of a wonky last few holes for him. But he was actually, I shouldn't even say that. He was 1 putt away from being in a playoff, wasn't he?
Yeah. I mean, you were one shot away, Patrick. An incredible shot by Pavon over the water. I'm thinking he's going to chunk it, go in the drink, and you're going to cash it what, 55-1, something like that. That's why we watched this show, because Højgaard is somebody I would have never considered. And I saw your bet, and I was like, do I dabble in? So I got in live. And of course, if I get in live, I'm sorry, I probably ruined your karma there. But before we get to matchups, let's hear from one of our sponsors.
The doubleheader in the dark. It's a two test: strategy, skill, and speed. Twists and turns, ready, some wheel-to-wheel action.
All right, it's winning time right now. It's matchup time, and Patrick McDonald's going to start because he's given a handicap matchup. You're not picking an even where ties will count. Sung Jae Im has to win by a stroke. Explain, how did you come up with this one?
First, I just want to thank you for bringing up the pain of last Saturday and really talking through it. Second runner-up for me already this year. Keegan Bradley should have won the Sony Open. I will live by that one. But yeah, Sung Jae Im has to beat outright Cameron Young -110. I know Cam is coming over from Dubai. A nice start there. Sung Jae coming off a miscut. Surprising one there at the Farmers. But I think it's a really good opportunity to buy low on Sung Jae. Just long-term, super consistent golfer. Really doesn't have a flaw in his game. So I think his floor is somewhere around a top 20 this week. Cam's a bit volatile. Like Sia said at the top, kind of in regards to Rory McIlroy, what Cam Young does best here is a little bit mitigated. So I'm going to take the South Korean. And then Justin Thomas, -110 over Ludwig Aubert. A lot of wedges this week. JT's wedge game is back. I think he will have the opportunity to club down off the tee more times than not, which will kind of mitigate one of his weaknesses. And while everyone is looking at the resurgence and the iron play, it's really a resurgence on the greens as well for Justin Thomas. That's what's really been buoyed this top 5 streak. So I love him at -110 over the young Swede.
All right. So Sia, you're also fading Cam Young, but you're going back to the Sam Burns train, which, I mean, after what we saw at the Amex and that meltdown at the end, I mean, I'm staying away from Sam Burns for now, but you're going right back to it. Why is that?
Well, the good news with the play is it's just a matchup, right? He just has to beat one guy, the same guy that Patrick McDonald is fading. So I'm not picking Sam Burns to win the tournament, although I suppose he's in play there if he gets hot, particularly with approach and on the greens, which we know he can do. Can I just point out something, Eric? Is Bradley Jacobs your shadow account? Because he said something about he sees such a great host. I love his energy. That's you, right? You're Bradley?
I don't want to give out my burner accounts. I can't tell you,
Fair
secrets.
Enough. And by the way, yeah, okay, fair enough. I think it's you. But by the way, Joe Neuenfeld, where can we find the round matchups? I think is what you're asking. So the round, just so you know, the round matchups aren't even out yet. So we don't even have round 1 matchups out yet. Normally they would be out right now, but they're not. So when we get them, that's something I'll definitely have on the Early Edge Thursday at 10. Those aren't usually included in my article. Those are usually tournament matchups. But anyway, let me get to those. Brendan Todd +120 over Keegan Bradley. So here's the thing. I think this is a great course fit for Brendan Todd. And we see that not just with his second place finish last year, but he's had some good finishes. It was just that one finish second place, and he's had a bunch of terrible finishes otherwise at Pebble Beach. So I like Brendan Todd in general. And I also like Keegan Bradley. I think he can have a good tournament now, but when we look at the short game, especially this week, short game's really going to matter. I don't usually look at around the green game too much. I usually kind of minimize that relative to other people in the industry. But given the wind and the rain and just the idea that Pebble Beach, you got to have good short game anyway because the greens are smaller, it's going to come into play. And Keegan Bradley, when I look at the weighted short game metrics for him versus Brendan Todd, it's kind of night and day. That doesn't mean Keegan Bradley's terrible around the green and with the putter, but especially when you condense it to the last 20, 24 rounds, Brendan Todd really flashes over Keegan Bradley. And then when you look at the ball striking, Brendan Todd is really good, especially on a course like this. He's fine relative to Keegan Bradley there as well. So he's got the course history going against Keegan Bradley. And even though he's not the better player, the course fit is certainly as good, if not better, for Brendan Todd. And so when I look at a +120 number, I mean, +120 is pretty great odds, right? I mean, I think you could make this -110 both ways, and I would at least consider Brendan Todd, but then you're going to give me +120, and I got to make it a play. So my next one is Sam Burns. We talked about fading Cam Young. When we look at the metrics for Cam Young, he'll flash here and there for a round, but overall, it's been really bad for quite some time. And Sam Burns, we're starting to see him put together, including in that tournament where you talked about, EC, with the meltdown. Sam Burns' metrics look pretty good. I think he's a decent course fit here, and Cam Young just hasn't done enough to show me that he's a threat to any of these middle tier or top tier golfers. So I'm going to take Sam Burns minus 120 over Cam Young.
All right, I have the 3 matchups. I'm going to fade Sungjae Im here, and I love Matt Fitzpatrick this week. I'll explain a little bit more later on, but he does thrive on links and coastal courses. There is kind of a synergy between the RBC Heritage, which is played the week after the Masters in Patrick's neighborhood of South Carolina, and this particular course. Jordan Spieth also pops there, and Patrick Cantlay has good success at both courses. So Fitzpatrick won that event over Jordan Spieth last year in a playoff. So I'm going to roll with him at even money over Sungjae Im. I also like Spieth. It's a common theme over Colin Morikawa, who let me down big time, eliminated me from my cut pool that I'm in last week. I need to pick one guy to make the cut every week. Colin, you shoot 5 under on day 1 on the North course, and you do what on the South course? It was like watching me plot, and maybe not. Okay. We'll just put it that way. I like Spieth over Morikawa at plus 110. We talked about Spieth's history here, 6 top 10s in 12 events, including a win. Morikawa played in the 2019 U.S. Open with a T35, but not as much experience, albeit he is a Bay Area guy, so maybe that helps a little bit. And I'm going with a little, kind of a random one. Denny McCarthy over JT Poston at plus 140. Poston has been really good lately. I mean, he's off to a great start. But Denny has been T12 and T4 the last 2 years here, gained nearly 9 strokes putting combined in those years. He gained 8 shots putting at the Sony Open en route to a T24. So it's not like he's in awful form, but I found these particular matchups at DraftKings and Caesars. Sia, where did you find your particular matchups?
Thank you for asking. So one is at Caesars and one is at DraftKings. I think the Sam Burns one over Cam Young, that's going to be DraftKings. Brendan Todd over Keegan Bradley, that one's going to be Caesars. And again, more matchups are going to come out across different sites. So you can always kind of message us and ask us if you're, like, for example, Ty Moore says, hey, do you like Todd over Bezuidenhout at plus 115? I actually don't love that because I think Seabez could have actually a pretty good tournament. I like how he's grading out, especially with that short game and approach metrics. So that's one I would probably stay away from. Although the price is right. Plus 115 is pretty good. I'd still stay away from it.
So in terms of matchups, not necessarily my number one thing to bet, but you know what is? Finishing position bets. This is what I love. And then when I look at the rundown and I see a parlay, it just makes me so happy. And I was actually talking with producer Jake before the show, Patrick, and Jake's like, boy, I love this parlay that Patrick put together. What is it and why do you like it?
Scotty Scheffler and Max Homa, both to finish inside the top 20. You got to remember, it's only an 80-man field. There's no cut this week. They're going to shed the amateurs at the halfway point, but all the professionals get 72 holes. You look at Scotty Scheffler, the guy eats, breathes, and finishes inside the top 20. And then Max Homa riding, I believe it's 11 straight top 15s going back to last year as well. Very comfortable spot for him. And I just love the way both of them profile, the way both of them are playing. And so top 20, 80-man field, the top quarter of it. You get 4 rounds. It's pretty much like a physical fitness test at that point. The longer they go, the cream rises to the top. So I like that at plus 125.
Well, we assume they get 4 rounds, but I guess we're going to find out how this plays out this weekend. We'll see. I think my prediction, if I were to make a bet on it, I'd say this goes 54 holes and they call it on Saturday. I don't know that necessarily the tour really wants to do that for an elevated event, but just a hunch. Now, Counselor, you have 3 top 30 bets, and you're going with a guy that you haven't mentioned before. You talked about Harmon, you talked about Brendan Todd, but Eric Cole's an interesting one, especially coming off a missed cut last week.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, the reason I did T30, I mean, this is an event, again, these elevated events, designated events, if you will, they're 80 players, right? So it's hard to get a good price on a guy you really like in the top 40 market. With that said, if you only have the top 40 market available to you and like top 20, top 10, I think the Brian Harmon, Brendan Todd numbers are going to be palatable, at least somewhat palatable in those markets. But again, they're going to be at a minus price, of course, because again, only 80 people in this field. But I'll start with what you wanted me to start with. Eric Cole, top 30. He was certainly well inside the top 30 last year when he played here. He really profiles well here. First of all, his finishing positions, 21st, 13th, 14th, 3rd, 2nd, outside of the miscut last week at Farmers, which really wasn't the best course fit for him. But his finishing positions have been really dominant. And honestly, when you look at his approach and you look at his short game, he profiles so well for this course. So unless the weather gets the best of him somehow, I don't see him falling outside of the top 30. So minus 110, I'm very willing to play. And then I already mentioned Brian Harmon, Brendan Todd at plus money. I'd be shocked if both of these guys were outside the top 30. I mean, I certainly have a little bit more confidence in Brian Harmon rather than Brendan Todd, but I definitely think both of them can fit inside the top 30, and I'm getting plus money for both.
Boy, plus money, as we always discuss, plus money, always a good thing, especially when it comes to golf bets. Go with 3 plus money bets here for finishing positions. Let's go Jason Day, top 10 at plus 400, 8 top 10s and 14 total trips to Pebble Beach, but no wins. He hasn't had a top 10 since a T2 at the Open Championship last July, but I guess we could say he's due, and he's a horse for the course. So at 4-1 to finish in the top 10, sounds good to me. Speaking of a guy that's red hot worldwide, a fellow Aussie, Adam Scott, top 20 at plus 190. He has top 10s in 7 of his last 10 stroke play events around the world. And the one time that he did play here, or most recently, a T7 in the 2019 US Open, where I would say that the conditions were probably more difficult than an average AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am. This week, though, I mean, normally that would be an obvious answer to this week. Who knows with that weather? And as Patrick talked about earlier, or was it Patrick Mackenzie Hughes? Maybe it was you, Sia. Okay, Sia. Top 40. I mean, you just got to finish the top half of the field at even money. He has a T10 and T16 in 5 appearances here. And at the Seaside course at the RSM Classic in November, he gained more than 8 strokes putting. And so the key for him this week is the flat stick. All you got to do is finish halfway up the board, and we get even money for it. Sounds good to me. And by the way, if you're going to make these bets, there's one place where it really makes sense to make this bets because it's the only sports book who pays out ties for finishing positions, and that is BetMGM. And you can also, if you're not a customer of BetMGM, what are you doing here? New BetMGM customers can sign up today and get $158 in bonus bets. Just place your first wager of at least $5, and you'll receive $158 instantly in bonus bets, regardless of your wager's outcome with bonus code EDGE158. That's EDGE158. Now, before we get to the winners, let's hear from one of our sponsors.
The biggest event in sports is coming to the entertainment capital of the world. CBS Sports HQ will have you covered every minute, getting you set with all the critical analysis you need. Ready, set, Vegas.
Can you believe the Super Bowl is almost here? It's going to be an absolute wild week next week with the Waste Management Phoenix Open, where one Patrick McDonald and I will be hanging out in the rain as it's apparently scheduled. The forecast is not pretty there either. But let's talk about this week and outrights. Speaking of a wild weekend, Patrick, I really like your first pick here. You've talked about him as Mr. California. So he's won, I believe, at 3 of the 4 California courses on tour, but he hasn't won at this one. I would say he's due.
Yep, 3 of the 4 wins overall out of his half dozen on the PGA Tour. Max Homa, 18-1. The thing I like about Max is he can kind of get it done in multiple ways. He can get it done with the irons if the short game is needed and it's a scrappy week because of the weather. We've seen him come through at a wet, windy, rainy TPC Potomac when he won the Wells Fargo Championship as well. And we can see him get really hot with the putter, especially on Poana. It kind of betrayed him a little bit there at the Farmers, but I like him to bounce back. I like the work he's putting in. So Homa's the pick at 18-1. I do love Colin Morikawa this week at 20-1. I love the course fit. I know the history isn't there. I'm fine with him missing the cut last week after 18 poor holes. That happens to everyone, even Colin Morikawa, EC. The issue I do have, or I guess some hesitation, is Morikawa does struggle in weather. Oh, he's an Open Championship winner. It was a good weathered Open Championship. He is not necessarily the most creative player in the world, but if you give him a ton of wedge opportunities, he is number 1 from 50 to 100 yards, top 5 from 100 to 150 over the long term. So I'm willing to take a risk. I know it's a steep price at 20-1, but I do see some value in it. It's just the weather that's making me a little more hesitant than I should be.
Well, I totally get that. I'm hesitant because I watched that back 9 at Torrey Pines on Thursday, and I was ready to throw something at my TV because I had an outright on Colin Morikawa, who was 5 under after the first day, thinking, all right, it's time to go catch Højgaard and whoever else was up there on the board. And instead he's going backwards, hitting shots that were not good. Can he bounce back this week at that price? Okay, you know what? I'll take your word for it. You know your stuff. I'm rolling with it. Now, Counselor, you're picking a couple of guys that haven't won in a while, so they're trying to get off the schneid here. JT at 25-1. It's an appealing price, but why do you like him this week?
Yeah, 25-1, 22-1 in certain places. I noticed BetMGM still has him at 25-1, other places at 22. So try to shop your lines, try to get the best line. So shout out to Joshua Lucero in the chat. He says, JT, right on. See, I was thinking the same thing. So JT is one of those guys, I mean, to a much lesser extent. I talked about this, well, really with almost everybody I talked about. But when I was talking about Brandon Wu, like just real quick, I'm not making a comp here, but Brandon Wu in DFS, he's just one of those guys that, like, to me, getting 4 rounds, like knowing that the recent form is really trending, like I think he could be a good DFS play. Can he win the tournament? No. Justin Thomas, he's trending in the same way. The approach game appears to be back. The short game is there. He's going to be dialed in with the wedges, like Patrick alluded to earlier in the show. And so I think the price is too long. I don't think the market has caught up to where Justin Thomas's game actually is. I like, not to say that this is some gross misprice, but I think Justin Thomas probably should be in the like 22-1, like he is in certain places, maybe even 18-1. I know this is a completely packed field, but I think this is a good course fit for Justin Thomas. I think he is trending in a major way, not just like a soft trend. I think this, like, we're really seeing something from Justin Thomas. Great course fit, great trend, like the number at 25-1. Tony Finau is a guy I'd never bet. I truly never bet him. He always, and that just might be a me thing. Like, I just never get Tony Finau right. With that said, now that his number has crept all the way to 40-1, I have to consider it. Last week, he was pretty underwhelming, like T69, but on approach, gaining 4.56. And really on approach over the last, I mean, it's been a while. He's been really good on approach. Where he's been kind of miss is with the putter. And we saw that last week. He lost a bunch of strokes with the putter. But with these POA greens, and especially with these weather conditions and the wet greens, like I think it's really tricky to evaluate who's going to be successful on these greens. So I do think Tony Finau can rebound. I mean, he did just gain putting 4 tournaments ago. It hasn't been there for him, but it wouldn't shock me at all if it gets there. And if it does, when you consider his approach play and is typically good around the green play, I think 40-1 is, again, this is a guy that probably should be in like that 33-1 range. I'm catching him at 40. Now I can finally bet Tony Finau with some peace of mind.
That's fair enough. Makes sense to me. Patrick, question from the chat from Josh. The tourney goes only 3 days. Does that benefit longer odds golfers or top tier guys?
Probably longer odd golfers, because Sundays on the PGA Tour in general are just a completely different beast. And I hate to bring him up because I have a soft spot for him, but look at someone like Tommy Fleetwood, who hasn't won a PGA Tour, and how often he's been close, but hasn't been able to close on Sundays. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle the announcement, right? If it's just going to be, they finish 3 rounds and then after the fact, they say we can't play anymore, or if it's going to be a before fact type of deal. It's a weird week just all around.
And
so
I do have to like make sure everybody understands if they joined us late. We're not saying with any sort of like definition that this is only going to go 3 rounds. We're just kind of speculating based on all the stuff we talked about at the beginning of the show. It could obviously very well go to 72 holes.
Yeah, by the way, Tommy Fleetwood is on my list of can't bet him to win outright after watching what happened at the RBC Canadian Open last year when Nick Taylor, ran him down. And Fleetwood had so many opportunities even in the playoff. He's on my can't bet it on top list.
Yeah, but EC, you can't do that to him because Nick Taylor, like, what was that, like a 71-foot putt?
But still, he should have won like holes beforehand.
Yeah.
Tommy Fleetwood,
You're bringing up like all my skeletons right now. It's
I was
unbelievable.
With you on Fleetwood.
He was minus 500 on the 18th tee.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. It was, golf betting is some of the most painful experiences when it comes to it is. I mean, there's, you watch a football game or a basketball game and you lose on a last second shot, but you invest 4 days in the golf tournament and you get all the way down. I mean, if you had Mito Pereira at the, 2022 PGA or 2021 or 2022 PGA championship. And then he just collapses on the 18th tee. I had a live bet on Mito at that point, and the dude hits it in the wilderness and then double bogeys, doesn't even make a playoff. Like, you can't ever bet that guy to win again, even on live. He's not going to win. He doesn't have it. Last week, what we saw, Jaeger, I mean, he just wasn't, he's a guy down the stretch. I'm just personally, I need to see something before I pick him to win. That's just my take on it. David Talk has a question, or he brought up a great bet, actually, a parlay. on our chat here. Rory McIlroy, Xander Schauffele, Max Homa, top 20 at plus 290. Do you like the odds for those three combined?
No such thing as a great 3-leg parlay. That's my answer. I mean, listen, I think it's fine. I would never bet that. Like one of those three guys, we're talking about the top 20 market. This is like full of talent, really like down the board. One of those three guys has a misstep. I mean, don't get me wrong. Plus 290 is a really nice number. I just generally don't bet those. If you want to put 2 in a parlay, I get that. 3, I think you're pushing it when it comes to golf, which there's just so much variance.
C is not going to want to hear my one of my long shot bets. But let me get to my outrights here. I'm going. I know Patrick was fading him earlier. I'm going Jordan Spieth here at plus 2,000, so 20 to 1. You can shop around 18 to 1 is where I've seen him, but 20 to 1 is the best number. As we talked about, a win in 6 top 10s and 12 appearances at Pebble Beach. He gained 6 strokes on the green to finish 3rd at the Century, as Patrick mentioned. And this is just one of those courses where I would blindly bet Jordan Spieth, and the other one where you blindly bet him. Well, I guess there's 2 of them. Augusta National, and then Harbor Town right afterwards. He's just great at all 3 of them. The history, horse for the course. I know he's going to be high owned in DFS. I'm putting my money where my mouth is on Jordan Spieth. I also, if you were to ask my one and done, my top pick this week, it's Matt Fitzpatrick. You can get him as high as plus 3,500. When he played here in 2019, he had a T12. He was T6 at this event in 2022. He excels on link style and coastal courses, and he also excels on courses with small green complexes. So a few of those courses where, let's say, the greens are smaller than most, Harbor Town, where he won last year, the Country Club, remember the 2022 U.S. Open, which he won, and Pebble Beach. Wouldn't you say he's due to complete the trifecta? At that price, sign me up. I'm good with that. All right, finally, it's the long shot section. Now, I do my parlays here, but the guys have some long shot bets. Sia, we'll start with you on this one. You're going back to a guy that you talked about earlier in the show, the sweet swinging lefty, Brian Harman.
Yeah, no need to belabor the point on Brian Harman. 90 to 1 is just too long for Brian Harman. I actually think he has win equity here. And again, we've seen him very recently win with this type of cast in terms of the talent of this field. So again, I think he's a good course fit. I think he can get hot for 4 rounds. 90 to 1, a great price. Sepp Straka, I mean, I got to be honest with Sepp Straka. Among all the long shots, like I considered a lot. Griot was the one that I considered. Adam Schenk is one I considered. The problem with Sepp Straka is his around the green game. And if that really becomes a factor, and if he's as bad as he normally is around the green, like he kind of has no shot here, especially this particular week. But at 110 to 1, knowing that he also has win potential, he's actually cashed in on outrights before. And the fact that he can get so dialed in with the approach game, I just think at 110 to 1, I think I'm willing to speculate with a guy that I know can close on Sunday and a guy that I know can get hot with the putter and be dialed in on approach.
All right. I got to admit, he's also on my X list. Last week, I had a parlay of 3 matchups. I needed Sepp Straka to make a birdie on his last hole on Thursday, and he bogeyed it. Not a par would have tied me against Eric Cole, and he lost it with a bogey on a par 5. What are we doing here? Come on, Sepp, you're killing me. All right, Patrick, Harris English, you're back on our guy here, plus 110 to 1. Why do you like him?
I don't think I've heard a better harp on his losses as much as you.
I'm bitter. I'm bitter.
Matchup. It wasn't even an outright.
You got to snap the wrist, walk away. Snap the wrist, walk away.
No,
Harris English.
I harbor my losses. Go ahead with English.
Harris English, 110 to 1. Like I said during the DFS segment, he's going to have to drive the golf ball well, but we saw him pop up in big-time tournaments. This is a guy who has won big-time tournaments before. This past season, contended at the API, a signature event, Wells Fargo, a signature event, the U.S. Open as well. Super volatile, super boomer bust, but that's kind of what you want down in triple digits. So I will take the former top 10 player in the world at 110 to 1.
I couldn't pick a triple-digit winner to save my life. Let's be honest. I trust you guys for that, so I just do parlays in this section. Going top 10 parlays, Spieth and Max Homa. Patrick gave the rationale for Homa. Spieth, I gave the rationale for him. I think Homa, that was the third guy that I wanted to add if I were to do a third outright. I think Homa very well could complete the California Slam this particular week. The California Sweep, 4 wins, 6 top 10s, and 11 California events since playing here in 2021. You're getting that at 7 to 1 for a top 10 and that includes ties. And a top 20 parlay, cover your ears, Sia. Xander Schauffele, Colin Morikawa, Matt Fitzpatrick, plus 600. I like Xander here. 5 top 10, or just in general, but he has 5 top 10s in his last 5 on American soil, and he was T3 at the U.S. Open in 2019. All right, before we end this show, we're going to talk about a couple of players. I'm going to ask you each about one player that we have not discussed. Patrick, I'll start with you. Patrick Cantlay, really good course history here. Recent form, not so good. Which way are you leaning this week?
I do not like to bet on Patrick Cantlay in bad weather environments because of his injury history. If you have heard him talking about how much work and effort it takes for him just to get ready to play a round of golf, it is very extensive given his back. So because of that, because of some shortcomings with the irons and the putter recently, I'm okay passing on him, but I totally understand if you want to. The guy's a stud. And Alex Jones asked in the chat if I have any thoughts on Live this week. I kind of like Joaquin Niemann.
Me too. Yep.
Yeah.
What are the odds on Niemann? Do you guys
14 to 1.
14.
Okay.
Yep. That's what I wrote up in the Live column that I put on Sportsline. Niemann was my top guy. Good call there. Yep.
Cool.
See, I want to ask you about Victor Hovland, last year's FedEx Cup champion. We went the whole show, pretty much didn't talk about him. Your thoughts on him this week?
I like Victor a lot. Actually, he was potentially an outright for me. I think it was, 14 or 12 to 1 at this point. It was a little too short given the talent of the field and given the fact that we haven't seen a ton of Victor lately. I think I'm going to play him in DFS. I'll say that. I think he's fine in the outright market. I'll probably wait and just try to catch maybe a longer number after day 1 or day 2. That's one of those things where that's why I'm trying to reserve some of my outright bankroll, maybe for a guy like Victor Hovland. Maybe I catch him at 20 to 1 after he slips a little bit or somebody gets really hot in round 1 or round 2. I think Victor Hovland's going to have a great tournament. And for the record, when it comes to the weather, we know that shouldn't phase him one way or the other. So I think Victor's a great play.
This will be a fascinating weekend to watch. And who knows if we're going to have a Monday finish. We may not have certain lines out on Tuesday night when we record this show next week for my favorite tournament of the year, the Phoenix Open. But guys, great show once again. Want to point out, everybody, go to Sportsline. If you're a Sportsline member, between the three of us, we have 5 columns up. I have a fantasy rankings column, and I have Live up this week. Sia has his expert picks column, which hopefully will have first round leaders if they ever are released. Patrick has a strategy and a best bets column that you do not want to miss. So check that out on Sportsline. Want to thank our producer, Jake, as always, for putting together a fine show. Want to thank the counselor, Nejad, the great Patrick McDonald. I am EC. As I always like to say, let's hit it big. Good luck.